Ready.
Good evening, everyone. We have been away for quite some time. We want to welcome all viewers to our programs, which are becoming monthly. And we do hope that what we presented so far would have been of interest and would be educational to you. This evening is no different than all the rest as we seek to bring to you another program. We do hope that you will find it may it be day or night, whatever, but most of all, we do hope that you continue to be fit, to be healthy, and to be energetic, and to do whatever you're going to do in the best of your ability. Now, this evening, we're going to have an interview with the author of a book called Mystery Babylon, the Catholic Church and the End of the World. In this edition of Talking Religion, I will be launching a series of interviews with Leonard Phillips, in which we'll be exploring the themes in a number of his books, which are available on Amazon. As I've mentioned before, Leonard R.Phillips is the author of several books. These books include Mystery Babylon, the Catholic Church and the End of the World, and that is the one we're going to look at tonight. Then we have At Hell's Gates, the Catholic Evangelical Takeover of America. Then another one is Smoke of the Devil, a Vatican novel. Is God a Moral Monster? Is another one. Fortified Chicken Broth for Black Souls. Sounds interesting, appetizing. Out of Babylon, Why Black People Should Leave Most Churches. And the last one I think that we've had here is The Grand Failure, How Christianity Became a Force for Evil in the World. Exciting titles, and I'm sure that they're exciting books, and you can only know what they contain if you purchase them. As mentioned in our previous edition of Talking Religion, Leonard Phillips is an Afrocentric freethinker with a Christian bias. As such, thereof, he is not constrained by what is considered as orthodox beliefs. As a freethinker, he gathers the facts and then draws conclusions based on the facts. The book we'll be exploring in this edition of Talking Religion is Mystery Babylon, the Catholic Church and the End of the World. Brother Leonard, I want to answer you a question. When one is writing a book, I would assume that one has to come to a title. What influenced you and made you come to this title of Mystery Babylon, the Catholic Church, and the End of the World?
Well, agreed. When you're doing research, you obviously try to find a title that captures the essence of the content of the book. And the research I looked at, I spent a lot of time looking at the whole idea of Mystery Babylon. Then I spent a lot of time looking at how modern religion fits into the concept of Mystery Babylon. I therefore spent a lot of time exploring the role of both wings of Christianity, Catholicism, and Protestantism, how that relates to the concept of Mystery Babylon. And of course, when one looks at issues pertaining to the future, there's always the question of whether mankind truly has a future. So the question of the end of the world looms large, and this is not just something now that religious people are contemplating, but even people from a secular perspective, as they explore themes like global warming, as they look at the ecological devastation that has taken place over the past, let's say, 2 centuries. Even in secular arenas now, people are beginning to wonder if life is truly sustainable on the planet. So the concept of the end of the world is something that not just religious people, but also secular people are also looking at. So I was hoping that this title would capture the attention of people who are interested in these kind of themes.
One other question before we get into the main menu. No, mystery. A mystery is something that most people say you can't understand. As it states, it's a mystery. So Mystery Babylon. Why mystery in front of Babylon? Because if a mystery is something that we don't really understand, how are you able to understand Mystery Babylon? And the title, you know, as the word before, Mystery Babylon.
Well,
you know, you come along with a mystery, something you can't understand it. It's puzzling. You can't get it understand. So why mystery?
right. The term Mystery Babylon refers to the fact that within the system of Babylon, there are deep, dark, almost impenetrable concepts and ideas that only an initiated few are supposed to understand. But if one looks at the book, the last book of the Bible is called the Revelation. And the Revelation is basically about an unveiling or revealing. So in a sense, even though Babylon is dark and mysterious, the concept of revelation now brings into focus the idea that you're going to get keys that would help you to unlock the dark mystery, the things that are unknown, bring into the surface that which is hidden and unknown. So that's what we'll be exploring in the pages of the book.
My first big question to you then. So in reality, what motivated you, Rodney Phillips, the author of so many other books, to write this book? What motivated you?
Well, basically, I have always been interested in studying, number one, the future, and number two, I've always been interested in historical studies. Now, when going back to maybe the early 80s, mid 80s, I remember there was a book that came out by the name of The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey.
Yeah, very famous author.
Right, it probably was one of the first books I read of a spiritual nature. And that book really had an impact. I remember there was also a film version of it, and I did, I think it was I went in either the Empire or the Plaza Cinema to watch the film version of it, and that kind of had a very powerful impact on my mind because the book and the film both focused on the concept of the end of the world. So these, both the book and the film, basically got me thinking about the future of life on the planet, and it started what I would like to call a lifelong quest to peer into the future of humanity, trying to understand what is the future of humanity. And basically, this is what started my journey of trying to understand the history and the future of humanity as it relates to the Bible. Then I think beyond Hal Lindsey, which would represent a spiritual perspective, in the early 90s, I came across some of the writings of Alvin Toffler. Now, you may or may not know that Alvin Toffler produced a trilogy of books, Future Shock, Power Shift, and Third Wave. And these three books, as I read them, I was really intrigued by Alvin Toffler's research into how history was being shaped, how civilization was developing, how the future was shaping up. And Alvin Toffler talked about the acceleration of the rate of change and how that acceleration in the rate of change would bring about what he called future shock in the first of his trilogy. So I would say that these two factors, the spiritual, which came from the watching Hal Lindsey's The Late Great Planet Earth, and then from a secular perspective, Alvin Toffler and his writings about the future of humanity.
A quick question. Hal Lindsey's prediction in The Late Great Planet Earth did not come true. Has that affected you up to this point in time? Or has it changed your thinking? Just a quick question.
Well, I mentioned that Hal Lindsey was his Late Great Planet Earth is what started my journey of understanding. But as you will discover in the book, I've evolved way beyond the thinking of Hal Lindsey. As a matter of fact, I've written against many of the things that Hal Lindsey has written. And I'm vehemently opposed to some of the concepts, as we will discover a little later. Some of the concepts that they pushed, I am totally opposed.
All right.
Some of these concepts.
Later on, maybe at some future time, we'll talk about the third wave. I find I've been doing some research on the third wave. A lot of people don't really understand the third wave, but maybe in a future presentation, we will deal with the third wave. Now, I'm glad you mentioned Hal Lindsey, because central to Hal Lindsey's prophetic outline is the nation of Israel that was established in Palestine in 1948. You discussed the nation of Israel in the opening chapter when we looked at the book. From your research into the prophetic writings of the Bible, is there any significance in the reestablishment of the nation of Israel in the Middle East in 1948? Okay. The emphasis, is there any significance to the reestablishment of the nation of Israel in the Middle East in 1948?
Mm-hmm. Well, right off the bat, I'll tell you that this is one of the major areas of disagreement I have with Hal Lindsey and the evangelicals, who seem to think that the establishment of Israel in the Middle East in 1948 was a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. I take a totally diametrically opposed position on that. I see absolutely no significance in the reestablishment of Israel. And I do that on the basis of biblical exegesis. For example, in Matthew 21, Jesus told the parable about the landowner who gave out his land to some people. And when he went trying to collect from the people would keep beating those the landowner sent to collect the rent for the land. Then ultimately the landowner sent his son. He said, surely they will respect my son and they will give me what is my due. But in the parable that Jesus told, Jesus said that when the landowner sent his son, the people who were working the land said, okay, we are going to kill the son and take the land for ourselves. And then Jesus asked his listeners, which would have been the scribes and the Pharisees, what do you think the landowner would do with these people? They said, well, he would destroy them. Then we find Jesus making a very, very interesting statement. Let me see if I can quote it here.
Statement.
It is from Matthew 21, verse 43. Therefore I say, the kingdom of God will be taken from you and given unto a nation, bringing forth fruit. So here we find Jesus, who is supposed to be the chief cornerstone of Christianity, telling the Jews that the kingdom of God would be taken from them and given to a people who would bring forth fruit. Now, a little later in the New Testament, when we find the Apostle Peter writing his epistle in 1 Peter, I think it is 2 verse 9, we hear Peter saying, but ye are true, and here Peter is talking about the Christian community. He says of the Christian community, but ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that you should show forth the praises of him who have called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. So first we have Jesus saying that the kingdom would be taken from the Jews and given to another people who would bring forth light. Then we have Peter stating that the Christian community was that royal priesthood, was that holy nation that God was now working through.
Rodney,
yeah, go ahead.
It's here that you were implying to me that some of those who are listening, that yes, you seem to be implying that yes, that it's in Israel, but you're trying to imply that it's of a different nature than the physical Israel. That's what you seem to be implying to me.
Well, definitely. If you go back to the origin of the name Israel, remember Jacob, he was originally, his name actually means the planter, But after he wrestled with God, he was given the new name Israel. And Israel means someone who has overcome, wrestled with God, and he overcame. So hence he was called Jacob. So an Israelite or Israel is someone who has overcome. Now, the Apostle Paul, who is the systematic theologian of the apostolic era, says, if ye be in Christ, then are ye Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. So what Paul is saying is that it is not lineal descent from Abraham that makes you Israel, but rather it is spiritual connection with Jesus that constitutes what is a true Israelite. So when Peter calls the Christian community the holy nation, the royal priesthood, what Peter was doing was agreeing with Paul that those who are in Christ, they are the true seed of the Abraham, hence they are the true Israel.
So you're saying it's no longer genealogy, it is faith. I think that's what you're saying there.
Right. It is not now tied to flesh. Israel is not tied to fleshly descent from the seed of literal Abraham, but it now has to do with connection to the true seed, which is Jesus. And another thing I would like to add in the book of Acts, and this is very important. You would recall that there was a big issue in the book of Acts about the Gentiles coming into the Christian community.
Yes.
Then
ceremonial system, etc.
Right. When Peter went into Cornelius's house, that was considered a scandal by Jewish standards. Jews, as you would know, were not permitted to fraternize with Gentiles. So when Peter went into Cornelius's house, and more significantly, when Peter prayed and Cornelius and his entire household received the gift of the Spirit, that created a paradigm shift in the thinking of the early Christian community. But that, of course, did not settle it in the minds of many. And so we had in Acts chapter 15 a big controversy about what the Gentiles were supposed to do when they became Christians. Were they supposed to start acting like Jews? Were they supposed to keep the whole ceremonial law that the Jews had been keeping for centuries? And so in Acts chapter 15, verses 14 to 17, we find James making a very interesting statement. And again, I want to quote it for impact. James, referring to what had happened with Peter and Cornelius, he said, Simon hath declared how God at first did visit the Gentiles to take out of them a people for his name.
Yes.
And he says, and to this agree the words of the prophet. After this, I will return and I will build again the tabernacle of David, which is fallen down, and I will build again the ruins, and I will set it up, that the residue of men might seek after the Lord, and call, and all the Gentiles upon whom my name is called, saith the Lord, who doth all these things. So here what James is saying is that the experience of Peter and the inclusion of the Gentiles into the Christian community was a fulfillment of what the ancient prophets had spoken about when they talked about the building again of the tabernacle of David, which was fallen down, and building up the ruins. So all those Old Testament prophecies that talk about the rebuilding of the temple and the ruins of Israel being reestablished and all of that, all those kingdom prophecies, what James and Peter were in effect saying is that these kingdom prophecies were being fulfilled when the Gentiles came into the Christian church. Now, the problem with Hal Lindsey and the evangelical arm of Christianity is that they continue to look at all of the prophecies in a very literal way. So when they read in the Old Testament about Israel being restored, they see that as something that is very literal. But in the book of Acts, we see James interpreting the Gentiles coming into the Christian community as the rebuilding of Israel, the rebuilding of the tabernacle, the rebuilding of the ruined places. This is how those prophecies were fulfilled in the New Testament. And remember, I said a little earlier that Jesus said the kingdom would be taken from the Jews and given to another people who would bear fruit. And Peter said that the Christian community was in fact that new nation, that new people who God was working through to establish his kingdom throughout the entire.
So therefore it means then, as I remember, it therefore means that any Jew who wants to join Israel has to be grafted down into the spiritual Israel.
Well, that is correct. Jesus made the statement, I am the door. Anyone who wants to be a part of the spiritual edifice that is being built on Christ, the chief cornerstone, has to come through the door, and the door would be Jesus. So the first century of Christians were Jews, but they had to enter through the door. They had to enter by faith in the Messiah. So every Jew now who becomes a part of the new community of Israel must come through the very same door. So there basically is no advantage to being a literal Israelite. Everything now shifts and revolves around faith in the true seed.
The wall of partition has been broken down. Let's go to our next question. Right. In the chapter entitled, Who Will You Worship? A big question. Who will you worship? You made the case for the worship of the God. Do you think most Christians today are worshiping the same God revealed in the Bible? A very powerful question. An extremely powerful question. Let me hear you.
Well, we had a discussion sometime back where we looked at the God of the Old Testament, and we concluded that most Christians do not worship the same God that the Jews in the Old Testament worship, or that Jesus or the Jews in the first century worship. And indeed, they do not worship the God that the disciples in the early church worshipped as well. Now, going beyond what we discussed there, when you go through the Old Testament, you will discover that when God wanted to establish, when the God of the Israelites wanted to establish the fact that he was the true God, he always pointed to the fact that he was the creator. The concept of his power to create, that was basically the argument used by God to establish his position of eminence as the true God of the universe. It's rooted in creation. Now, it is also interesting that in the Old Testament, and it also comes through in the New Testament, that there was a sign of the creatorship of the God of the Bible. And that sign was, in fact, Shabbat. Now, if you go into, like, for example, the...
Translate that word for me, please.
Well, Shabbat is just the Jewish word for rest, what people call the Sabbath. Now, Shabbat is a sign of the creative authority of God. I know there are a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but there are some Christian denominations who observe Shabbat as the Jews did in the Old Testament. Seventh-day Adventists being perhaps one of the most prominent ones today. But I do tend to disagree with Adventists on the reason why Shabbat is observed, because Adventists push the view that Shabbat should be observed because it is a part of the Ten Commandments. Now, you know my position on the Ten Commandments. I believe that the Ten Commandments was something that was given because of the fallen condition of humanity. It was given to mankind at Mount Sinai, and it was of a temporary nature. Shabbat, on the other hand, is connected to creation. Long before Mount Sinai, you hear in Genesis, after the creation cycle, we hear the Creator resting, which is the same thing as observing Shabbat. He rested. So Shabbat is connected to the whole concept of creation. So in establishing Shabbat, I always like to point people to creation. But more importantly, Shabbat is also associated with recreation, which now has to do with the work of transforming men and women back into the image of God, which what we call redemption. Now, Paul in Romans chapter 7 says, I'm not ashamed of the good news. I'm not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God unto salvation. Now, creation is the power of God to make something out of nothing. Recreation or salvation is the power of God taking the nothingness of humanity and reshaping it into something new. So I like to relate Shabbat to both creation and redemption. I think this is the better way of establishing the validity of the Shabbat principle. And once again, when you look through the Christian world today, you would observe that the majority of Christians do not observe this sign of the Creator's creatorship, which is in fact Shabbat, which is another very unfortunate development in Christianity. That one of the most powerful signs pointing into who the true God is totally ignored and cast out by most Christians. So to answer your question, no, I don't think the majority of Christians today are worshiping the creator God of the Old Testament.
When we look at the we would talk about a sign, and we know that sign and seal interchanges. So therefore, you are saying to me, and others who may understand, you are basically saying the Sabbath is a seal. So I think that's what you're saying.
Well, I more like to say it is the sign of a spiritual reality. Remember in Exodus, well, I should say Ezekiel 20:20. Moreover, I give them my Shabbats, my Sabbaths, that there may be a sign between me and them, that I am the Lord that sanctifies. Now, to sanctify means to make holy. So Shabbat, I do not ever subscribe to the view that Shabbat is the seal. Shabbat is not the seal. Shabbat is the sign of the inward work of grace that takes place in the believer. So more important than having Shabbat is having the experience that Shabbat points towards. And the experience that Shabbat points toward is experiencing spiritual rest, getting rest from sin.
Okay, we're going to move on, but I would command and discuss, because you talk about the inward. You also know that there's also outward, there's inward and outward. But let's move on. You mentioned in the book, as the world, this is a mega shift, and it's a big word, from the industrial age to the information age, organized religion is making a big amass. I've also heard you, Rodney, argue that religion is on decline in Europe. The millions of the people who do not subscribe to any religion organization is the fastest growing and the largest single group of people in the West. The forces of secularism and atheism are making significant strides in Europe and America. Why do you insist that religion is making a big comeback in our day? And we know, for example, it was only quickly that when we were just checking some information the other day, and in Europe and even the United States, a lot of places where churches are now halls and dance halls and centers. So religion has really, it's a fact that religion has really fallen body. But you go and answer the question.
Okay, now the two concepts seem to be contradictory.
Yes.
On one hand, there is a decline.
Follow it.
Right, there's a decline in Christianity. Europe basically has, as you said, the churches are in disarray. Many of the great cathedrals are abandoned. Very few people still go to church, even though a lot of people claim to be Christian. Yet the whole idea of regular church attendance is really down. In America, Pew Research did a bit of research into what is happening in America. And what they find is that even though religion is alive and well in America, but what they discovered was that nuns, or people who claim no religious affiliation whatsoever, happen to be the largest group in America right now. I think Pew said that there were about 23.1% of the America's population claimed to be nuns. Then the next largest group would be the Catholics, which was about 23%. And then the evangelicals were maybe somewhere around about 22%. So nuns seem to be the fastest growing group in America. But while that is happening, while we are seeing a decline of Christianity in both Europe and in America, we are also noticing something very important and interesting. We are noticing, for example, this plays out more in America than in Europe, where what we are seeing is a small group of highly motivated operatives. In the 70s, you had the moral majority with Jerry Falwell and Paul Wainwright. And the moral majority fell into some hard times in the 90s. But since then, we've seen a resurgence of what is now called the religious right, which morphed into the Tea Party. And now in the Trump era, we have a coalition between white evangelicals, the Trump administration, and the alt-right movement in North America. And all of these different coalition forces which support President Trump, all of them have a particular beef. They believe that white Christian civilization is on the decline. And they also push the view that white people are on the verge of experiencing what they call white genocide. They're very concerned about the destruction of white culture, Christianity, which they equate with European hegemony. They say that all of this is being attacked by the liberal forces. So right now what we are witnessing is a very dedicated group of people who are working, and they have been fortunate to get a president like President Trump, who has been more than willing to push a lot of the agenda of the religious right. In recent times, you would recall when he moved the embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv down to Jerusalem. Apparently, the evangelicals were even more ecstatic about this development than even the Jews themselves, because remember, the evangelicals are of the opinion that for end time events to come about, certain things have to happen in the state of Israel. So Jerusalem being established or being recognized by America as the capital of Jerusalem, of Israel, basically was a very significant development. I think Janine Pirro on Fox News said that Trump had actually fulfilled biblical prophecy. Now, you being a man who understands history would recall that in the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, communists represented a very small percentage of the Russian population. But the communists were very organized. They were very motivated. They had a plan, and they were willing to die for their plan. And so a very small group of revolutionaries were able to hijack the political process in Russia. They were able to overthrow the Tsar regime, and they went on then to establish the Bolshevik Revolution, which later became the focus of the Soviet Union, which was then a massive empire that stretched across Russia and most of Eastern Europe. So small minorities who are very motivated can influence history in a very significant way. And what we are seeing in America right now is a small group of highly motivated operatives who are working in Congress, who are working at the federal level, influencing President Trump to basically push America along certain lines which are convenient for the evangelicals. So in that sense, religion is playing a very important role. And I also should mention that the evangelicals have been able to work, or rather are working very closely with Catholics. And when you combine evangelicals and Catholics, that's a very significant voting bloc in America. And you know full well that politicians listen to large voting blocs. So if Catholics and evangelicals eventually start to push for a particular agenda, politicians in America will be hard pressed to resist such an agenda. So religion is making a comeback, and it is influencing public policy in America and indeed in some of the Eastern European countries as well.
Now, I see there from my understanding and my knowledge, I see a very conspicuous case of church and state, which now is going to lead me on to the next question to you. The majority of Christians today believe that the beast is some devil inspired dictator who will emerge in the European Union, and the mark of the beast is some physical mark that will be placed on our citizens in the future, will enable them to buy or to sell. In the age of coronavirus, some Christians are saying that the mark of the beast will be a microchip that will be placed in the vaccine being developed to track the coronavirus. To share your best views on the beast and the mark of the beast as presented in the Bible. I want to emphasize as presented in the Bible because I believe that people who study the Bible should really look at what the Bible says and not what people are saying. So I want you, Rodney, to present it as mentioned in the Bible.
Okay, now this is another area of disagreement that I have with Hal Lindsey and the evangelical interpreters of prophetic events. Now, according to Hal Lindsey, the beast or the Antichrist is some embodiment of evil that will emerge within the European Union. Will emerge around the time of the rapture, and this beast or the Antichrist would, after basically deceiving all the kings of the earth into accepting him as the solution to the problems facing humanity, he would set up his kingdom in Israel, which is one of the reasons why evangelicals are so happy with the reestablishment of Israel in Middle East in 1948. They go on to say that the beast would make an alliance with the nation of Israel, and then after 3.5 years, the beast would break the alliance, double cross the Israelis, and eventually all this would lead to the Battle of Armageddon with 2 million or 200,000 Chinese coming into the Middle East. They also had Lindsay talked about a coalition between the Arab nations and the Soviet Union. Fortunately, God never bothered to tell Hal Lindsay about the breakup of the Soviet Union, but if you read Hal Lindsay's books, you will see that he seemed to have thought that the Soviet Union, in collaboration with Arab nations, would also launch an attack against Israel.
Primarily Turkey, go ahead.
Yeah. So that is their perspective. That's the evangelical perspective of the beast. And of course, people like in modern times, Tim LaHaye, who wrote the Left Behind series, I mean, they're to be commended for trying to draw attention to a subject which most Christians perhaps do not know enough about. But unfortunately, I'm of the opinion that Hal Lindsay, Tim LaHaye, and most of the evangelicals who write on prophetic events have not delved deeply enough into the prophetic writings of the Old and New Testament. And so they've missed a lot of very important information that would help people understand what the Bible means when it talks about the beast and the Antichrist. Right. Like, for example, when you go into the book of Daniel, you will find Daniel talking about a lot of beasts. In Daniel chapter 7, you have the story or about the prophet Daniel seeing a lion, a bear, a leopard, and then he sees a nondescript beast. And Daniel was told that these beasts were not really beasts, but these beasts were political powers. There were nations that would rise up and would do something very significant. And even the evangelicals appreciate the fact that in Daniel, it is talking about the rise of Daniel 7 is talking about the rise of the kingdoms of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. In Daniel chapter 7, another power is introduced after the fourth beast, and this power is called the little horn. Now, this little horn has some very interesting characteristics. Makes war against the saints. He has a mouth speaking great things. Cast down truth to the ground. He continues for a particular time period. And I always like to challenge people to try to do a comparison between the little horn in Daniel chapter 7 and the beast in Revelation chapter 13.
You think the change names and laws is the important one you missed. Go ahead.
Right. Now, when you look at the comparison between the little horn and the beast of Revelation 13, you will see that Daniel and John are describing the very same entity in history.
Amazing.
So I tell people, if you can identify the little horn in Daniel chapter 7, then you know who the beast of Revelation chapter 13 is. And to make a long story short, in my investigation, I went down to the Protestant Reformation to see how they looked at these prophecies. And it is quite amazing that the Protestant reformers, Martin Luther, John Calvin, Melanchthon, all the reformers were unanimous in identifying the beast or the Antichrist as the apostate system of Christianity that emerged in Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. We today call that system the Roman Catholic system. And Luther and Calvin and all the reformers were, as I said, unanimous in identifying this apostate form of Christianity as the great Antichrist, as the great beast, as Mystery Babylon, as recorded in the New Testament and in the Old Testament. It is, again, very unfortunate that evangelicals who come out of the Protestant tradition basically have rejected the position of the Protestant reformers and have gone to great lengths to distance themselves from the position that the Protestant reformers had. It is to the credit of a few Christians today who maintain the Protestant tradition of identifying the beast and the Antichrist as the apostate system of Christianity that emerged in Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire.
All right, now, in the chapter The Day of the Dragon, you argue that the global balance of power will remain with America rather than shifting back to Europe as most evangelicals and futurists think. Do you think that the US will be able to maintain its preeminent position as the fearless global leader of the world, considering the damage currently being done to the image of America by none other than President Trump?
Well, the Trump presidency is doing untold damage to America's image as the global leader. But it is interesting that Trump, from the inception of his presidency, he's been talking about making America great again. So Trump sees himself, Trump and the coalition that backs Trump, they see themselves as engaged in a religious and cultural war, which is designed to put America in a position of dominance globally. Now, it's a very tricky thing because in one sense, you have the image of America being tarnished. When you look at what is happening in American cities right now, policemen shooting down Black people in very indiscriminate and brutal ways. People are looking on and they're saying, well, how could this nation claim to be the bastion of democracy when in truth and in fact they have so many problems, and the injustices of the American system are plainly being seen by all and sundry. But the reality still remains. America is the peerless global leader. China is a very powerful nation. In terms of economics, China rivals the US. In terms of technology, China rivals the US. But yet, China still lags behind the US in many different areas. The European Union basically is a protectorate of the United States. Japan, again, another protectorate of the US. So basically, in spite of the Trump presidency, the US has still been able to maintain its position of global dominance. And it is unlikely that any nation or coalition of nations will be able to challenge the US in its position of global dominance.
Well, let me answer your question. Now, let us look at the United States quickly. It is losing its influence in the Middle East. It is being seriously challenged by China and indeed so it is being challenged by Iran. It is being challenged by North Korea. And the United States definitely seems to be receding as a global power. It reminds me of saying you have a dog that is barking but has no bite. So really, actually, we have to really see how it works out. Because at the eyes of the beholder at the moment, the power of the United States seems to be winning. It lost the war in Vietnam. It is running out of Afghanistan. So it seems that the military power of the United States is winning. But all I will say, obviously doesn't like. So we'll see what happens.
Mhm.
Now,
Well,
let me continue.
right, notwithstanding all that you just said, um, the United States still has the ability to project its military almost at a moment's notice to any part of the globe in pursuit of American foreign policy initiatives. And as we saw in Iraq, as we saw in Afghanistan in recent times, uh, it does not look as though any nation can right now resist the incursions of the American military. It would be interesting to see what would happen if China were to enter
China,
the battlefield against the US, especially since
North Korea.
both these nations are nuclear powers. It would be interesting to see. But from what we've seen in recent times, you know, they said that Iraq had, I think, about the fifth largest army in the world. But when the American military establishment was unleashed on Saddam Hussein and his Republican Guard, in 2 2, the Republican Guard was routed and Saddam was found hiding out in a bunker somewhere underground. So the US military continues to be a very powerful force, and that power makes America still the most potent force in international relations.
Okay, but I think China, North Korea, and India has the largest standing armies in the world. Let's continue. You have a chapter entitled Tyranny of the Righteous. Rodney, what's this all about? Are you arguing that religion is inherently tyrannical?
Okay.
That's a serious thing.
No, if you look at
Tyranny of the righteous.
right, if you look at Jesus and the principles that Jesus enunciated, take for example his teachings at the Beatitudes, where Jesus talks about how people ought to treat one another. It is inconceivable to think that Jesus, if he were to set up a kingdom, he would rule as a tyrant. However, when the people who bear the name of Christ, when they came into power, especially from the 4th century after the church made a deal with Constantine, we find the church when it came to power in the Council of Nicaea, after it was established that the Athanasian party carried the day, the people started to beat up the supporters of Arius. Arius was exiled, and that started a trend in Christianity where the leaders of the church would use the power of the state in pursuit of anyone who disagreed with the church. And that basically became formalized when the popes became the masters of Europe. Not even the kings and queens of the most powerful European nation states for a while were able to challenge the authority of the popes. This situation of the ruthless use of power by the church became so blatant that the English writer Lord Acton, his famous statement about power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, was a commentary on the raw abuse of power, both by the monarchs in Europe and by the church in Europe. So even though the religion of Jesus, as it follows the principles of Jesus, should not be tyrannical, we find that Christians who seem to have deviated from the principle of Jesus, when they came into power, they used their power in a very ruthless way. I also think in terms of what happened in Germany during the period of the Nazis, a bit of history that a lot of religious people wish would just go away. But the reality is that both Protestants and Catholics made agreements with the Nazis, made agreements with Hitler, and the Catholic Church signed a concordat with Hitler. They'd done it with Mussolini before, then they did the same thing with Hitler, and both Protestants and Catholics were basically silent when the German forces of death went after the Jews in Europe. The Catholics and Protestants did very little to help the Jews who were being persecuted by the Nazis. So again, we see how Christianity basically aligned itself with a very dark force in history. Then another unreported occurrence in the Second World War was what happened in Yugoslavia, where the Ustashi forces basically went after Orthodox Christians. And this is what was referred to as one of the worst genocides in history, where you had religious clerics going after people and slaughtering them with such devastation. I remember reading the book Hitler's Pope by, I think it was John Cornwell. And John Cornwell said that the Ustashi forces, which were basically Catholic forces, were so brutal that even the Nazis registered shock at what these religious people were doing to Orthodox Christians in the former Yugoslavia. So I'm not suggesting that true religion is tyrannical. But what I have discovered as I look at history is that very often Christianity, when it gained power, used that power in a very destructive fashion and became just as tyrannical as any of the dark forces in history, whether we're talking about communism, whether we're talking about fascism, or whether we're talking about what happened in France during the revolution when you had the reign of terror. Religion has unleashed its own reign of terror on humanity.
But at the same time, you're saying that distorted Christianity can be tyrannical. We only got to think of Queen Isabella sending Columbus and those guys into the New World, Cortez and Pizarro in South America, and we go down the line. So I said it's distorted. Let's move on. In the chapter, The Age of Information, Age of Deception, you explore the role of technology in the future of the planet. Do we still have any? Are we living in a total surveillance society?
Well,
very good question. Very good question.
The idea of surveillance society, that is very much being discussed today. I remember years ago, one of our cultural icons, Red Plastic Bag, sang a song, and in the song he asked, are we on the net or are we in the net? And that question basically got to the heart of where technology has taken mankind today. Now, using technology, I'm here in my house, you are in your house, and we are having a face-to-face interview. And coronavirus has basically driven many people to become even more dependent on technology. Even churches have jumped online and are using Zoom and many various other technological innovations to continue to deliver their services. Now, in the context of the coronavirus, trying to relate it now to the issue of are we in a surveillance society, there is a push at present in the world to create a cashless system where money goes out of circulation and people pay for everything via either their cell phone or through some other method, whether it's a chip in the hand or some other part of the body. Now, China basically has set the standard in terms of the surveillance state. And China has been using its ability to surveil its citizens with very good effect during the coronavirus. Now, Chinese citizens who are tested and show that they are positive with coronavirus, they are forced to quarantine themselves. Now, you have surveillance cameras all over China, and these surveillance cameras are able to do facial recognition very easily. So if you have been tested positive and you are in circulation, the Chinese authorities will know. Secondly, there's no such thing as hiding from the Chinese authorities when you are in China. China leads the world right now in cashless business transactions. Chinese are forced to walk around with their phones. They make purchases with their phones. And as you and I know, a phone is nothing more than a tracking device which can be used to basically pinpoint your location at any point in time. Then we have all kinds of devices in our houses. We have televisions, we have our laptops, we have our computers, we have all kinds of technology which are
Even our television.
yes, which are online. And some time ago there was an issue where people were suggesting, and I think there was a lot of truth to it, that the cameras in even the television in your house could be remotely activated so that people could turn on cameras on whether it's your television, whether it's your laptop, whether it's your phone. People can turn these cameras on, turn on the mics. They can listen to what you are saying. They can watch what you are doing in the privacy of your homes. And then the next stage of technology will be the Internet of All Things, where they're going to try to connect just about everything, our homes, the fridge, your bed, every single thing will be somehow connected to the internet. And streams of information about you will constantly be sent to these massive data banks, which will then be able to create some profiles of you, and they may even be able to make predictions about what you will or will not do. These big data firms, what they do, they collect a lot of data that people are, indiscriminately leaving behind as they go online, as we shop, as we visit sites on the internet. We are leaving a tremendous amount of data, and these big data firms are collecting this data and they're selling it right now to businesses. But in the long term, these profiles that are being developed of every citizen currently using the internet can be used by any would-be dictator to basically interfere with your ability to function as a human being in society. And I do agree with the evangelicals that we are heading to a point where people will not be able to buy or sell. But this buying and selling will be the product of technology invading our personal spaces to the point then where we will be sitting ducks for any would-be dictator who wants to disrupt our somehow interfere with our lives and livelihood.
System is called Babylon. Babylon was just one of the many empires that sought to create a global system of government. Why do you suppose that the ancient global system is called Babylon rather than Egypt or Greece or Rome?
Babylon basically was the fountainhead of everything. If you look at the philosophical systems of the world, you will see that it can all be traced right back to Babylon. Babylon was the heavy hitter in terms of philosophy. And if you could go a little into some history, it is believed that Nimrod, who was the grandson of, or the son of Ham, it is believed that he was the first builder of civilizations. By the way, Nimrod was a brother, meaning he was a black man. He was the first builder of civilizations. And it is also believed that Nimrod was the creator of a philosophical system that rivaled the philosophical system which is reflected in the Judeo-Christian scriptures. Now, Nimrod, when he died, the myth of Nimrod developed, that Nimrod eventually was elevated to becoming a god. His wife Semiramis also was elevated to godhood, and their son Tammuz, ironically the son of Nimrod, which is Tammuz, was conceived after the death of Nimrod.
Mercy.
So in a sense, a ghost was the father of Tammuz. And I'm smiling because when you look at this history, it prefigures a lot of what Christians today actually believe. So I'm just suggesting that Babylonian concepts have even infiltrated into Christianity itself. You know, Judaism, even though Judaism was supposed to represent a completely different philosophical system, you still hear the prophets lamenting about the Israelites worshiping the Queen of Heaven. Now we know the Queen of Heaven was Semiramis. The Jews also used to weep for Tammuz. Tammuz, the son of Nimrod and Semiramis. So Babylonian culture, Babylonian religion permeated much of the ancient world, and it has diluted or has made its way right down into our very times. And I believe this is the reason why in the last book of the Bible, in the book of Revelation, you read about mystery Babylon rather than reading about mystery Egypt, because Babylon was the fountainhead. It was the source. And today we are witnessing a resurgence of the Babylonian system of philosophy and religion. And that is being seen not only in the secular environment, but I believe it is also being seen in the religious environment, which includes both wings of Christianity, Catholic and Protestant.
I always tell Christians, Rodney, that they should really check their history, because weeping for Tammuz has become Lent, baking cakes to the Queen of Heaven has become hot cross buns, and primarily nearly all of the Christian festivals are pagan. But we'll move on. Now, you know, one other thing, you know, Rodney, from what you're saying, it seems that nearly all roads are leading to Babylon. And later on, we have to look at Jerusalem, because, you know, one can look at the Bible as a tale of two cities, Babylon and Jerusalem. But I guess later on sometime we look at Jerusalem.
And of course, when you're talking Jerusalem, we're not talking about that entity over in the Middle East, but we're talking about spiritual Jerusalem, which is the edifice that is being built on the great foundation, and the great foundation is Jesus himself.
Well, I have this thing, right, that Israelis and Israelites are two different people in my translation, but we'll get to that at a different time. My last question. In the last chapters of the book, you look at some words that can alter or even end life on this planet as we know it. Is life as we know it under any serious threats? Do we really have anything to be worried about as a species on the planet Earth?
Okay.
That is frightening.
Mm-hmm. Now, this week I've been listening to Reverend William Barber. William Barber is a very
good guy.
very interesting preacher. As a matter of fact, as I listen to Reverend Barber, his rhetoric is almost reminiscent of Martin Luther King. He has a passion for the poor, which is totally lacking among white evangelicals and among all of the, well, I shouldn't say all, but among the major wings of Christianity. I really would recommend that people go online and listen to what Reverend Barber is saying. He has a lot to say, not only to Black people, but he has a lot to say to the world in general and white people especially. Now, one of the things that Reverend Barber has been, he mentions 5 things, but I'm just going to mention one, and that is ecological devastation. For the past 2,000 years, well, I shouldn't say 2,000 years, for the past 200 years, as European civilization traversed the globe, we have witnessed an exploitation of the resources of nature unsurpassed at any other period. Just recently, the Trump administration gave the okay to drilling in the Arctic region in Alaska. And many environmentalists are very upset because they believe that pristine territory should not be disturbed. And they believe that the drilling in Alaska will disturb the ecology of that area and may perhaps place polar bears and some of the other wildlife that are found in that area under significant stress. Now, we've witnessed within the last 200 years, as I said, exploitation of the resources of nature. And this, of course, has led, whether evangelicals want to admit it or not, whether Donald Trump wants to admit it or not, the evidence is there that global temperatures are rising. Now, this is giving energy to a lot of weather events, like, for example, the excessive heat that we are experiencing creates very dry, brittle conditions. And when you couple that then with thunderstorms and lightning strikes, this is what has been happening in California, where we find all these fires burning, over 500 and something fires burning simultaneously in California recently.
Australia.
That bushfires in Australia and different parts of the world. And going back to the US and the heat, a few weeks back, they said that in Death Valley in California, registered temperatures of 130 degrees. They said that that was the hottest temperature recorded for many, many, many years. So we are seeing a climate that is warming up. Then, of course, we here in the Caribbean, we are at the tip of global climate change, because every year, and right now we are currently in the hurricane season, and we know only too well how global warming is impacting on nations, because when you think in terms of what happened in the Bahamas last year, in Grand Abaco and in the Grand Bahamas, where Hurricane Dorian basically sat down on those islands in the Bahamas for over about 36 hours, packing winds in excess of 185 miles an hour. We here in the Caribbean, we understand the devastation that global climate change is having. The Caribbean Sea is extremely warm, and as these systems pass through the Caribbean, they are whipping themselves up into an intensity. So we are seeing an increased frequency of Category 4 and Category 5 hurricanes, which used to be a rarity in years gone by, but almost every season now we are seeing a Category 4 or Category 5. And that's just the ecological aspect of disaster affecting mankind. We are currently still in the midst of a global pandemic. There seems to be no end in sight, even though a number of countries are stating that they have developed vaccines. It is left to be seen whether these vaccines are actually going to be the solution to the problem. And then, of course, we have the usual problems, wars. It is scandalous that even as the COVID-19 pandemic races across the African continent, you still have Africans engaged in fighting in Somalia, fighting in Egypt, fighting in Chad, fighting in
Nigeria.
Yeah, Nigeria and Sudan. Sudan is the country I was trying to remember.
Eritrea.
Right.
One going between Eritrea, Egypt, and them guys.
Right. Then, of course, there's the tension right now between Egypt and Ethiopia over the building of the dam, and one hopes that that does not break out into some kind of war, because many of the futurists that I've been reading have been suggesting that wars of the future will be fought over water. Now, water is becoming a very scarce resource on the planet. The glaciers which are found high in the mountains, which tend to be the major sources of water that feed into rivers, the glaciers are retreating. Now, when the glaciers retreat, it means that many rivers, the water levels in these rivers are going to shrink, and that is going to have an impact on nations that depend on water rivers for
Nigeria and Africa.
Right. So we have a host of environmental problems which are really threatening, and we have problems which are rooted in mankind's inhumanity to mankind. We have the issue of racism in North America, racism in Brazil, and I like to remind people that all that you see going on right now in North America in terms of Black people being targeted by the state, the very same thing is going on in Brazil right now.
Racist country, Brazil.
Because of the linguistic barrier, perhaps we are not as aware of the challenges that Black Brazilians are facing at this point. But under Bolsonaro, they are experiencing
this president, another Trump, is the
they're experiencing the very same thing that Black Americans are experiencing under Trump. So all of these are issues, and of course, even now within the scientific community, there are concerns that we could be headed for a period where we could very well be threatened by mass extinction events. Yellowstone volcano, they say if that volcano ever erupts, it will disrupt life on the planet. From outer space, we also have challenges from outer space. If a meteor were to break away and strike the Earth, mankind could very well find himself in the position of the dinosaurs who were driven to extinction by a meteoric strike on the Earth. So these are some of the challenges that we are facing as a species, and as mankind faces these species, it behoves mankind not to become separate from each other, but it becomes necessary for mankind to build caves of understanding where we all can come in to share our best ideas and work toward dealing with some of these almost intractable problems that mankind is facing today.
And let's not forget chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons. The amount of nuclear weapons that, you know, the nations have can totally obliterate the population of the earth. And what is frightening, a lot of countries are seeking to get their hands on nuclear weapons. You've got Iran trying to get, you got India has, Pakistan. A lot of people don't realize that Israel has a vast quantum of, and so, you know, and maybe look at it, only takes a dictator, somebody who's crazy or something, go after one button, one press of a button can cause the annihilation of man. You know, as we look at it, as a people, really and truly, we must be aware of what is going on. We must try to be up to date. We must live the life, and wherever possible, we must pass on information. Brother Rodney, once again, it has been a distinct pleasure to engage in a dialogue with you, Rodney. You're, again, as I say, you're author, public speaker, and entrepreneur. Books by Leonard Phillips can be downloaded as ebooks or ordered as hard copies from Amazon. After reading 2 books written by Leonard Phillips, I'm in a position to say that he writes very well. And like any other author I have read already, I've been mentally enriched by the ideas presented. To get more information about books by Leonard Phillips, visit his author page at amazon.com/author Leonard Phillips. Leonard is all the lowercase letters with no space. Let me repeat that again, amazon.com/author/Leonard Phillips. Leonard Phillips is all, again, Leonard Phillips is all lowercase letters with no space. That one I had to read because of the things I've known from here. So once again, you know, I want to thank you, Leonard, for being the kind of person you are, for really coming and really exposing your books and really talking about the very interesting topics that we would have discussed in it, and topics that people who are interested in the Bible, interested in prophecy, and all these things, all the information is there. You know, when we post this video, we want you to share it with your friends, that they will make themselves available to the information, and they too can be able to source these books, because it is by reading true and accurate information that we're able to be enlightened and our minds can be open to things that we may not have known. You know, we want to be able to present this information. We want people to be not led astray by some of the false doctrine and false theories that are there. We again want to thank you, and once again, we want you to promote this book, read it, and pass it on, because sometimes, you know, reading, you know, gives knowledge. Knowledge is power. Reading and being informed makes you prepared for tomorrow. Let's not be caught unawares, because the information is there. The onus is on you to get the information and to prepare yourselves and your families. It may save your life, not only physically, but spiritually. Leonard, thanks. Have a great night. We want to thank all those who will be watching. Once again, God bless. Until next time.
Thank you very much, Brother Prince.